A millionaire visits his ex-wife's house to see his daughter. There he sees his 7-year-old little girl cleaning the floor and crying. Meanwhile, the mother and her new husband were watching TV. What the millionaire did next shocked the whole city. Before you hear this incredible story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. The sun was setting on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, when Richard Mendoza's Porsche Panamera crossed the gates of the luxurious mansion in one of the most upscale neighborhoods of Los Angeles. The 45-year-old man, with graying hair and piercing green eyes, turned off the engine and sat motionless for a few seconds, staring at the imposing facade of the house he once called home. For almost a year, Richard hadn't set foot in this place. The memories of the turbulent divorce from Claire, his ex-wife, still weighed heavily on his chest. But today he was here for a reason more important than any grudge or resentment. Sophia, his 7-year-old daughter, the light of his life. With a deep sigh, Richard got out of the car and walked to the front door. The impeccable garden and lush flowers contrasted with the turmoil of emotions he felt inside. Before he could ring the doorbell, the door opened, revealing Anthony, the butler who had worked for the family for years. "Mr. Mendoza, what a pleasant surprise," exclaimed Anthony with a genuine smile. "It's been so long." Richard nodded, returning the smile with a certain melancholy. "Good evening, Anthony. I'm here to see Sophia. Is she here?" The butler's expression changed for an instant, almost imperceptibly, before responding, "Yes, sir, little Sophia is at home. Please come in." As he followed Anthony through the entrance hall, Richard couldn't help but notice small changes in the decor. Photos of him had been replaced by abstract artwork, and the floral perfume that Claire loved so much had given way to a more masculine, woody aroma. "Mrs. Claire is in the living room with Mr. Gus," Anthony informed hesitantly. "As for Sophia..." Before the butler could finish, Richard heard a sound that made his heart clench. The muffled cry of a child. Without waiting for Anthony, he followed the sound, his footsteps echoing through the marble corridors. As he turned the corner into the kitchen, Richard came upon a scene that left him paralyzed. Sophia, his little princess, was kneeling on the cold floor, scrubbing it with a brush. Silent tears ran down her delicate face as she continued her task, apparently unaware of her father's presence. For a moment, Richard couldn't move, shocked by what he saw. His daughter, who should be playing, laughing, being a child, was there, performing a household chore clearly inappropriate for her age, in evident distress. "Sophia?" he called, his voice trembling with emotion. The girl looked up, blinking in disbelief. "Daddy?" she whispered, dropping the brush. In 2 long strides, Richard reached his daughter and took her in his arms, feeling the small body tremble against his. "My love, what's going on here?" he asked, stroking the girl's dark hair. Sophia buried her face in her father's chest, sobbing. I spilled juice on the floor, Daddy. Mommy said I had to clean it all up before dinner, or else..." Richard felt a wave of fury rise within him. Gently, he sat Sophia on a nearby chair and knelt in front of her, wiping her tears with his thumb. "Listen, my love, you didn't do anything wrong. Accidents happen, and it's not your job to clean up like this. Where's your mother?" As if answering his question, the sound of laughter came from the living room. Richard clenched his fists, struggling to keep calm in front of his daughter. "Stay here for a moment, sweetheart. Daddy's going to talk to Mommy, okay?" Sophia nodded, still softly sobbing. Richard gave her a kiss on the forehead before standing up, determination etched on his face. As he entered the living room, the scene he found only increased his indignation. Claire, a 38-year-old woman with impeccably styled blonde hair and perfectly manicured nails, was reclining on the sofa, laughing at something Gus, her current husband, was saying. A glass of red wine dangerously swayed in her hand. "Claire!" Richard's voice cut through the air like a sharp blade. The smile on Claire's face froze, her blue eyes widening in surprise, and perhaps a touch of fear. "Richard, what are you doing here?" Gus, a man a few years younger than Richard with a gym-sculpted physique and an artificial tan, stood up, instinctively placing himself between the couple. "I came to see my daughter," Richard replied, his voice laden with controlled anger. "And I found something that deeply disturbed me." Claire put the glass on the coffee table, standing up with rehearsed elegance. "What are you talking about? Sophia is fine. She's just cleaning the kitchen." "Floor on her knees and crying?" Richard interrupted, taking a step forward. "Is that what you call fine, Claire?" Claire's face paled, but she quickly composed herself. "Don't be dramatic, Richard. Sophia just spilled juice and was helping to clean up. It's important that she learns responsibility." "Responsibility?" Richard almost shouted, his composure beginning to crumble. "She's 7 years old, Claire, 7, and you two are here drinking and laughing while our daughter cries alone in the kitchen." Gus stepped forward, chest puffed out. "Look here, man, you have no right to come into our house and—" Richard interrupted him with an icy look. "I have every right when it comes to my daughter's well-being, and you stay out of this." Turning back to Claire, Richard continued, "I can't believe what I'm seeing. How can you allow this? How can you treat our daughter like this?" Claire crossed her arms, a mixture of defensiveness and guilt on her face. "You're exaggerating. Richard, Sophia is fine. She just needs to learn that actions have consequences." "Consequences? She's a child. Her role is to play, study, be happy, not to be a maid in her own home." At that moment, Sophia appeared at the door of the room, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "Daddy?" she called, her voice small and frightened. Richard's heart broke at the sight of his daughter's state. In a few steps, he reached her and picked her up, hugging her tightly. "It's okay, my love. Daddy's here now," he whispered, stroking the girl's hair. Claire made a move to approach, but Richard took a step back. "Don't come near," he said, his voice laden with determination. "This ends here." With Sophia in his arms, Richard walked towards the exit. Claire followed him, her face a mixture of panic and disbelief. "Richard, what do you think you're doing? You can't just take her." Ignoring his ex-wife's protests, Richard continued walking. In the entrance hall, he found Anthony, who observed the scene with a look of concern. "Anthony, please get some clothes and essential items for Sophia," Richard asked, his voice softer as he addressed the butler. The older man nodded, casting a look of understanding before quickly climbing the stairs. "Richard, be reasonable," Claire tried again, her voice trembling. "Let's talk about this. Don't do anything rash." Turning to face her, Richard spoke with a calmness that didn't reflect the turmoil inside. "Talk? Now you want to talk? Where was this willingness for dialogue when our daughter needed you?" "No, Claire, it's over. Sophia is coming with me and my lawyer will be in touch." At that moment, Anthony returned with a small suitcase. Richard took it with his free hand, thanking the butler with a nod. "You can't do this," Claire shouted, panic evident in her voice. "I'm her mother. I have custody." "And I'm her father," Richard replied, his voice firm, "and I'll do whatever is necessary to protect my daughter." With those words, he left the house, carrying Sophia and the small suitcase. The sound of Claire's desperate screams echoed behind him, but Richard didn't look back. His mind was already focused on the next step, ensuring the safety and well-being of his daughter, no matter what it cost. As he placed Sophia in the back seat of the car, carefully fastening the seatbelt, Richard knew that a difficult battle awaited him. But looking at his daughter's face, marked by tears but now calmer, he was sure he would do anything to protect her. "Where are we going, Daddy?" asked Sophia, her voice small and hesitant. Richard smiled at her, trying to convey reassurance. "Home, my love, we're going home." As the Porsche left the property, Richard picked up his cell phone. There was an important call he needed to make. His lawyer's name lit up on the screen as he dialed, determined to start the process that would change their lives forever. Richard's Porsche cut through the Los Angeles night, the city lights reflecting on the windshield like shooting stars. In the back seat, Sophia slept, exhausted after the emotional turmoil she had experienced. Richard frequently glanced in the rearview mirror, his heart aching at the sight of her little face still marked by tears. As he drove, his mind was racing. The phone call to Mark, his longtime lawyer, had been brief but intense. "Richard, what you did was impulsive and could complicate things legally," the lawyer had warned. "But given what you've told me, we have grounds to request emergency custody. Come to my office first thing in the morning." Now, with the adrenaline subsiding, Richard began to feel the weight of his actions. He knew he had crossed a line, but the image of Sophia kneeling on that cold floor was like an open wound in his chest. No, he couldn't regret it. His daughter needed him. Arriving at his penthouse apartment in a luxurious building in Beverly Hills, Richard parked and gently woke Sophia. "We're here, princess," he whispered, opening the car door. Sophia rubbed her sleepy eyes, looking around, confused. "Daddy? Where are we?" "At Daddy's house, my love. You're going to stay here with me for a while, okay?" The girl nodded, still half asleep, and let herself be carried into the building. The night doorman, Mr. Johnson, widened his eyes at the sight of Richard with the child in his arms, but one look from the businessman was enough to avoid inconvenient questions. Inside the apartment, Richard took Sophia directly to the guest room. It was a spacious room, but clearly not prepared for a child. The white walls and minimalist decor seemed cold and impersonal for a 7-year-old girl. "Tomorrow we'll make this room prettier for you, okay?" Richard promised, placing Sophia on the king-size bed that seemed to swallow her. "Okay, Daddy," she murmured, already snuggling into the soft sheets. Richard kissed his daughter's forehead and stayed there, watching over her sleep for a few minutes. When he was sure she was sleeping soundly, he left the room, leaving the door ajar. In the hallway, he finally let out a long sigh, leaning against the wall. The weight of the day fell on his shoulders like an avalanche. Had he really done that? Taken his daughter from her mother's house without prior notice or legal authorization? Walking to the living room, Richard poured himself a generous dose of whiskey. The amber liquid burned his throat, but he barely felt it. His mind was racing, reliving every moment of that surreal night. The sound of his cell phone snapped him out of his trance. It was a message from Claire. "How could you do this, Richard? Bring Sophia back now or I'm calling the police." He felt a wave of anger rise in his chest, but he restrained himself. Responding now in the heat of the moment would only make things worse. Instead, he blocked Claire's number. Tomorrow, with a cool head and Mark's legal support, he would deal with this situation. Richard spent the next few hours in a state of restless vigilance. Every half hour he went to Sophia's room to make sure she was okay. Part of him feared that Claire would follow through on her threat, and the police would show up at any moment. At 5 in the morning, unable to sleep, he decided to do something productive. He called his personal assistant, Rachel. "Rachel, sorry to call so early," he began as soon as she answered with a sleepy voice. "Mr. Mendoza, did something happen?" she asked, instantly alert. "Yes, and I need your help. My daughter Sophia is with me now and will be staying for an indefinite period. I need you to cancel all my appointments for today and tomorrow, and then reorganize my schedule for the next few weeks. I'm going to need more flexibility." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Richard could practically hear the gears turning in Rachel's efficient head. "Understood, sir. Anything else?" "Yes, I need you to hire a children's decorator. I want to transform the guest room into a princess room by the end of the day. Money is no object. It just needs to be ready when Sophia wakes up tonight." "Consider it done, Mr. Mendoza. I'll take care of everything." After hanging up, Richard felt some of the weight lift from his shoulders. Rachel was incredibly competent, and he knew he could count on her to make Sophia's transition as smooth as possible. The following hours passed in a blur of phone calls and preparations. At 8 a.m. sharp, Richard was in Mark's office, explaining the situation in detail. The lawyer listened attentively, his face a mask of professionalism, but Richard could see the concern in his eyes. "Richard," Mark began after a long silence, "what you did was risky. Legally, Claire has primary custody of Sophia. She could accuse you of kidnapping." Richard felt his blood run cold. "Kidnapping? But I'm her father." I know," the lawyer placated, "and given the circumstances, I think we can argue that you acted in the child's best interest. But we need to act fast. I'll file for emergency custody today, alleging negligence and possible mistreatment." "And what about child support?" Richard asked. suddenly remembering the generous monthly deposits he made to Claire. Mark frowned. "We can ask for a temporary suspension, given that Sophia is under your care now. But be cautious, Richard. Cutting off the money could make Claire react even more aggressively." Richard nodded, absorbing the information. "Do whatever is necessary, Mark. I just want to protect my daughter." Leaving the lawyer's office, Richard felt a mixture of determination and apprehension. The legal battle was just beginning, and he knew it would be difficult. But when he thought of Sophia, of her innocent smile and the trust with which she had snuggled into his arms the night before, he knew he would do anything to keep her safe and happy. Returning home, Richard found a team of decorators already in full activity. Children's furniture, colorful fabrics, and toys filled the hallway. In the midst of the organized chaos, Rachel coordinated everything with the efficiency of a general. "Mr. Mendoza," she greeted him with a professional smile. "The room will be ready by the end of the afternoon, as requested. I also took the liberty of ordering some clothes and essential items for Miss Sophia." "Thank you, Rachel. I know what I'd do without you," said Richard, genuinely grateful. With everything under control at home, Richard decided to make a crucial stop before picking up Sophia from school. Rachel had already arranged for an emergency transfer. He drove to the nearest mall and entered a toy store. Standing in the middle of the doll aisle, Richard felt completely lost. What kind of toys would a 7-year-old girl like? He realized with a pang of guilt how much he had missed of Sophia's life in the past year. A saleswoman approached, noticing his confused expression. "Can I help you, sir?" Richard explained the situation briefly, and the young woman smiled understandingly. "Don't worry, we'll find something perfect for your daughter." An hour later, Richard left the store with more bags than he could carry. Dolls, educational games, art kits, children's books. He wanted to make up for all the lost time. Arriving at Sophia's school, Richard felt his heart race. How would she react? Did she understand what was happening? When the bell rang and the children started coming out, Richard spotted Sophia. She looked small and vulnerable amidst the crowd of students. But then her eyes met his, and a smile lit up her little face. "Daddy!" she shouted, running towards him. Richard knelt down, opening his arms to receive her. The impact of Sophia's hug almost knocked him over, and he felt tears forming in his eyes. "Hi, Princess," he whispered, holding her tight against his chest. "Are you okay?" Sophia nodded, still clinging to him. "Are you taking me home now?" Richard hesitated for a moment. How to explain the complex situation to a child? "Sophia, remember I said you'd be staying with me for a while," he began gently. "So for now our home will be my apartment. What do you think?" Sophia's eyes widened. "Like a sleepover party?" Richard couldn't suppress a smile. "Something like that, yes. But for a longer time. And guess what? I have a surprise for you at home." Sophia's face lit up with anticipation. "Really? What is it?" Richard felt his heart warm. "You'll see when we get there. It's a big surprise." As he drove back home, with Sophia chattering animatedly about her day at school, Richard made a silent promise. No matter what happened, what legal or emotional battles he had to face, he would do everything to be the father Sophia deserved. And who knows, in the process, they might rebuild the family they once had, but in a stronger, truer form. The days that followed were an emotional roller coaster for Richard and Sophia. The apartment, once a solitary refuge for a workaholic businessman, now pulsed with the vibrant energy of a 7-year-old child. The room that Rachel had prepared was an instant success. When Sophia saw the walls in soft shades of lavender and pink, the castle-shaped bed, and the shelves filled with books and toys for the first time, her eyes sparkled in a way Richard hadn't seen in a long time. "Is it all for me, Daddy?" she asked, barely able to contain her excitement. Richard smiled, feeling a wave of emotion at seeing the happiness stamped on his daughter's face. "All yours, Princess. Welcome to your new kingdom." Sophia ran around the room, touching each object with reverence, as if fearing everything would disappear if she blinked. When she reached the vanity, where a collection of princess tiaras was displayed, she stopped, her expression suddenly serious. "Daddy," she began hesitantly, "can I keep all of this even if I do something wrong? You won't make me clean the floor if I spill something, will you?" Richard's heart broke at hearing these words. He knelt beside his daughter, holding her small hands in his. "Sophia, my love, listen carefully," he said, looking directly into the girl's eyes. "You will never ever have to do anything like that here. Accidents happen and that's okay. Your job is to be a child, to play, to study, and to be happy. Do you understand?" Sophia nodded, her eyes watering. Then, on impulse, she threw her arms around her father's neck, hugging him tightly. "I love you, Daddy," she whispered. Richard felt tears running down his face as he hugged his daughter back. "I love you too, my princess, more than anything in this world." The days turned into weeks and a new routine began to establish itself. Richard completely reorganized his work schedule, delegating more responsibilities to his team and working remotely whenever possible. Mornings were dedicated to taking Sophia to school, and afternoons, when he wasn't in crucial meetings, were reserved for helping her with homework and playing. However, it wasn't all roses. The legal battle with Claire was just beginning, and it was exhausting. Mark had managed to get a temporary custody order for Richard based on allegations of negligence, but Claire wasn't willing to give up without a fight. One afternoon, while Sophia was at ballet class, Richard received a call from Mark. "Richard, we have a problem." The lawyer's voice sounded tense. "Claire is counterattacking. She claims that you're a workaholic, emotionally distant, and incapable of providing a stable environment for Sophia." Richard felt his stomach sink. "But that's ridiculous. I've completely changed my life for Sophia." I know, Mark appeased, "but your history counts against you. The judge will want to see concrete evidence that you've really changed and can offer a stable home for Sophia." After hanging up, Richard stood still, looking out the window of his home office. The panoramic view of Los Angeles, which once filled him with pride for all he had achieved, now seemed cold and distant. What really mattered was right there in that apartment that was slowly transforming into a true home. Determined, Richard picked up his phone and made a call that would change everything. "Rachel, cancel all my appointments for the next 2 weeks. I'm taking a vacation to stay with Sophia." On the other end of the line, there was a moment of surprised silence before Rachel responded, "Of course, Mr. Mendoza. Should I reschedule the meetings or delegate them?" "Delegate what you can, the rest reschedule for 3 weeks from now, and Rachel, thank you for everything." The 2 weeks that followed were transformative. Richard and Sophia embarked on a journey of reconnection and discovery. They visited the zoo, went to the amusement park, had picnics in Griffith Park, and even took a small trip to the coast. On a sunny afternoon at the beach, while building an elaborate sandcastle, Sophia looked at her father with a curious expression. "Daddy, why doesn't Mommy call me?" The question caught Richard off guard. He had blocked Claire's calls on his own cell phone, but he hadn't imagined that she wasn't trying to contact their daughter directly. "I don't know, my love," he answered honestly, "but I'm sure she thinks about you every day." Sophia was silent for a moment, carefully shaping a sand tower. "I miss her sometimes," she admitted in a low voice, "but I like staying with you more, Daddy." Richard felt a lump in his throat. "Sophia, your mother loves you very much, and it's okay to miss her. When we get back to Los Angeles, how about we call her?" The girl nodded, a small smile forming on her lips. "Okay, can we invite her to have ice cream with us someday?" The idea of a civilized meeting with Claire seemed almost impossible at that moment, but Richard didn't want to disappoint his daughter. "Of course, Princess. We'll see what we can do." Back in Los Angeles, the routine established itself in a way Richard had never imagined possible. He discovered immense joy in simple things, helping Sophia with homework, reading stories to her before bed, preparing breakfast together on weekends. A month after bringing Sophia to live with him, Richard received another call from Mark. "I have good news," announced the lawyer. "The judge was impressed with the changes you've made in your life. Sophia's psychological evaluations were also very positive. He's inclined to maintain custody with you, with supervised visits for Claire. Richard felt a mixture of relief and guilt. And how did Claire react to this? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Not very well, to be honest. She asked to speak with you, Richard. She said she wants to try to reach an agreement outside the courts. The idea of facing Claire face to face made Richard's stomach churn. But he knew that for Sophia he needed to try. All right, he agreed. Set up a meeting on neutral ground, maybe at your office. 2 days later, Richard found himself sitting across from Claire for the first time since that fateful night when he had taken Sophia. The contrast was striking. The elegant and confident woman he had known was now with deep dark circles, her hair without its usual shine, her posture defeated. "How is she?" was the first thing Claire asked, her voice trembling. "She's fine, Claire, happy, healthy, she misses you." Claire nodded, tears forming in her eyes. I messed everything up, didn't I? I was a terrible mother." Richard felt a pang of compassion. Despite everything, he knew that Claire loved Sophia. "You made mistakes, yes, but we all do. What matters is what we do from now on." They talked for hours, unearthing old hurts, admitting mistakes, and slowly beginning to build a bridge of understanding. In the end, they reached an agreement. Primary custody would remain with Richard, but Claire would have regular visits, initially supervised. "I'm going to change, Richard," Claire promised before leaving. "For Sophia, I'll be the mother she deserves." Richard nodded, sincerely hoping she would keep that promise. That night, as he tucked Sophia into bed, the girl surprised him with a question. "Daddy, are we going to be a family again someday?" Richard stroked his daughter's hair. Thoughtful. "We already are a family, my love. You, me, and yes, your mother too, even if in a different way now. And you know what? Families come in all shapes and sizes. The important thing is that there's love." Sophia smiled, her eyes already heavy with sleep. "I like our family, Daddy." As he watched his daughter fall asleep, Richard reflected on the incredible journey they had traveled in such a short time. The future was still uncertain, with many challenges ahead. But there, at that moment, with the soft sound of Sophia's breathing filling the room, he knew he was exactly where he should be. The life he had built, focused on professional success and material possessions, now seemed so empty compared to the richness of being truly present in his daughter's life. Richard made a silent promise to himself and to Sophia. No matter what the future held, he would always put her love and well-being first. With a last kiss on his daughter's forehead, Richard left the room, leaving the door ajar. The apartment, once so impersonal, was now full of life, with Sophia's drawings on the refrigerator, toys scattered around the living room, and the comforting aroma of a true home. As he prepared for bed, Richard smiled to himself. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, he was genuinely looking forward to what tomorrow would bring. The following months brought a new dynamic to Richard and Sophia's lives. The routine they had established was beginning to solidify, but not without its challenges. Richard was determined to balance his career with his role as a present father, a task that proved more difficult than he had initially imagined. One Wednesday morning, Richard woke up to the sound of the alarm and the smell of something burning. He jumped out of bed in panic, running to the kitchen, where he found Sophia standing on a stool trying to make pancakes. "Sophia, what are you doing?" he exclaimed, quickly turning off the stove. The girl looked at him with wide eyes, a mixture of guilt and disappointment on her face. "I just wanted to make breakfast for you, Daddy, as a surprise." Richard felt his heart melt. He took a deep breath, calming himself, and knelt beside his daughter. "Thank you, my love, it's a very sweet gesture. But remember what we talked about, not using the stove alone, it's dangerous." Sophia nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "I'm sorry, Daddy. I just wanted to help, because you always look so tired in the morning." Guilt hit Richard like a punch to the stomach. He had been so focused on proving he could be a good father and maintain his career that he didn't realize how it was affecting Sophia. "Come here," he said, pulling her into a hug. How about we make breakfast together? I'll teach you how to. Make safe pancakes, okay? Sophia's face lit up with a smile, and together they spent the next half hour making a delicious mess in the kitchen. Richard called the office to let them know he'd be arriving a bit later, prioritizing this moment with his daughter. As they ate the pancakes, some a little misshapen, but all delicious, Richard realized he needed to make some changes. He couldn't continue trying to be Superman, balancing everything alone. That afternoon, he scheduled a meeting with his executive team. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, looking at the expectant faces around the conference table. "Over the past few months, I've tried to maintain the work pace we've always had, while also taking on full custody of my daughter. I've realized this isn't sustainable, neither for me nor for the company." There was a murmur of concern in the room. Richard raised his hand, asking for silence. "I'm not abandoning the company, far from it, but I need to redistribute some responsibilities. Each of you was chosen for your competence and loyalty. It's time to trust you more." In the hours that followed, Richard worked with his team to restructure the company's leadership. He would continue as CEO, but would delegate more day-to-day tasks, focusing on strategic decisions and maintaining a more flexible schedule. As the weeks passed, Richard began to see the fruits of this decision. Not only did the company continue to thrive under shared leadership, but he was more present and less stressed at home. However, not everything was rosy. Claire's supervised visits began, bringing a new dynamic to the family relationship. The first visit was tense, with Sophia alternating between joy at seeing her mother and anxiety about leaving her father. "You're going to stay here with me, right, Daddy?" Sophia asked, clinging to Richard's hand as they waited for Claire to arrive at the park where the visit would take place. "Of course, Princess, I'm here the whole time," he assured her, although his own heart was racing. When Claire arrived, there was a moment of uncomfortable silence. She looked different, simpler, without the elaborate makeup and designer clothes she used to wear. Her eyes, however, sparkled at the sight of Sophia. "Hi, my love," she said, opening her arms. Sophia hesitated for a moment, looking at Richard as if asking for permission. He nodded encouragingly, and the girl ran to hug her mother. The following 2 hours were an emotional roller coaster. Sophia alternated between moments of joy playing with Claire and moments of insecurity, always returning to Richard's side. Claire, in turn, made a visible effort to connect with her daughter, but it was clear that there was a distance to be overcome. At the end of the visit, while Sophia played on the swing, Claire approached Richard. "Thank you," she said, her voice low, "for taking such good care of her and for giving me this chance." Richard nodded, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. "She needs both of us, Claire. I hope we can make this work." The visits continued in the following weeks, each one a little less tense than the previous one. Sophia began to feel more comfortable with her mother's presence, although she still clearly preferred to stay with Richard. One day, after a particularly successful visit, Sophia surprised Richard with a question. "Daddy, Mom has changed, hasn't she?" Richard thought carefully before answering. "Yes, my love, I think she's trying very hard to be a better mother to you." Sophia was silent for a moment, playing with the hem of her shirt. "I like her like this, but I still like staying with you more." Richard felt his heart tighten. "Sophia, it's not a competition, okay? Your mother and I love you in different ways, but equally important ones." The girl nodded, seeming to process the information. "Okay. Can I ask for something?" "Of you, course, Princess. Next time, can we have a picnic all together? You, me, and Mom?" The idea of spending time with Claire outside the context of supervised visits made Richard hesitate. But seeing the hope in Sophia's eyes, he knew he couldn't deny it. "We'll talk to your mother about it, okay? If she agrees, we can try." Sophia's smile lit up her entire face, and Richard knew he had made the right decision. In the following weeks, Richard found himself navigating uncharted waters. Balancing his role as a single father, CEO of a growing company and ex-husband, trying co-parenting was a daily challenge. There were moments of doubt, nights when he wondered if he was doing enough, if he was making the right decisions. But then, there were moments like when Sophia ran to him after a day at school, her eyes shining with excitement to tell him about a new friend or a lesson learned, or the nights when they cuddled on the couch, reading stories together, and he felt her comfortable weight falling asleep in his arms. One night, as Richard was tidying up the kitchen after dinner, he heard Sophia humming in her room. He quietly approached the door and saw her playing with her dolls, enacting a family scene. "And now Daddy and Mommy are going to hug," she said, bringing two dolls together. Because even though they don't live together, they're still a family. Richard felt tears forming in his eyes. He realized then that, despite all the challenges and uncertainties, they were on the right path. Sophia was happy, safe, and loved. And in the end, that's what really mattered. That night, lying in his bed, Richard reflected on the incredible journey they had traveled in the past few months. He knew there was still a long way to go, many challenges to face. But for the first time in a long time, he felt truly at peace. With a smile on his lips, Richard fell asleep, looking forward to what the new day would bring. Because now every day was a new adventure, a new chance to be the father Sophia deserved and the man he always wanted to be. Autumn arrived in Los Angeles, painting the trees in Griffith Park in golden and reddish tones. It was a sunny Saturday, and the park was full of families enjoying the mild weather. Among them, Richard and Sophia walked hand in hand carrying a picnic basket. "Do you think Mom has arrived yet?" asked Sophia, her eyes anxiously scanning the park. Richard smiled, trying to hide his own apprehension. "Probably. Your mother was always punctual." This would be their first picnic together, an idea that Sophia had been insisting on for weeks. Richard had initially been reluctant, but seeing his daughter's enthusiasm, he realized it was an opportunity to show her that, despite the changes, they could still be a family, even if in a different way. They spotted Claire sitting on a bench near the lake. She waved timidly and Sophia ran towards her. "Mommy!" shouted the girl, throwing herself into Claire's arms. Richard observed the scene with mixed emotions. Seeing Sophia happy made him glad, but there was still a twinge of pain when he saw Claire, reminding him of everything they had been through. "Hi, Richard," Claire greeted, standing up with Sophia still in her arms. "Hello, Claire," he replied, forcing a smile. "Good to see you." The three walked to a quiet spot under a large tree, where they spread out the picnic blanket. Sophia immediately began taking food out of the basket, chattering about how she had helped Richard prepare the sandwiches. "Daddy, let me cut the tomatoes." "With a plastic knife, of course," she said proudly. Claire laughed, casting a surprised look at Richard. "Looks like you're doing well in the kitchen, huh?" Richard shrugged, a genuine smile forming on his lips. "Well, I had to learn. We couldn't live on takeout alone." The conversation flowed surprisingly well. They talked about Sophia's progress in school, her new friends, the ballet classes she had recently started. Richard noticed how Claire seemed genuinely interested, asking questions and listening attentively to Sophia's excited answers. At one point, while Sophia ran to feed the ducks in the nearby pond, Claire turned to Richard with a serious expression. "Richard, I wanted to thank you," she began, her voice low. "I know I wasn't the best mother and you had every right to push me away completely, but you didn't do that. You're giving me a chance to be part of her life again." Richard was silent for a moment, watching Sophia in the distance. "I'm not doing this for you, Claire. I'm doing it for her. Sophia deserves to have both parents in her life as long as it's healthy for her." Claire nodded, her eyes watery. "I understand, and I promise I won't waste this chance. I'm in therapy, you know? Trying to understand why I acted that way, why I let things get to that point." The sincerity in Claire's voice caught Richard by surprise. He looked her in the eyes, seeing no longer the cold and distant woman he had left months ago, but someone genuinely remorseful and determined to change. "I'm glad to hear that, Claire, really." The rest of the afternoon passed peacefully. Sophia insisted they play frisbee, and soon the three were laughing and running across the lawn. For a brief moment, it was almost as if they were again the family they once had been. As the sun began to set, painting the sky orange and pink, it was time to leave. Sophia, exhausted but happy, fell asleep in Richard's arms as they walked back to the parking lot. "She looks so peaceful," Claire commented softly, stroking her daughter's hair. Richard nodded. "She is. I think having both of us here today meant a lot to her." Reaching the cars, there was a moment of hesitation. Claire looked at Richard, then at the sleeping Sophia. "Richard, I know I've asked for a lot already, but would it be possible to have more moments like this? It doesn't have to be always, but from time to time." Richard considered for a moment. Part of him still wanted to protect Sophia, to keep distance from Claire, but another part, the part that saw Sophia's radiant smile at having both parents around, knew what the right decision was. "Yes, we can try. Slowly, okay? We'll see how Sophia feels and how things progress." Claire's grateful smile was genuine. "Thank you, Richard. Really." As he drove home, with Sophia still asleep in the back seat, Richard reflected on the day. It hadn't been perfect, but it had been a start of something new, something that could perhaps be good for all of them. In the days that followed, Richard noticed a subtle change in Sophia. She seemed lighter, happier. The visits with Claire, which previously caused some anxiety, were now anticipated with excitement. One night, as Richard tucked Sophia into bed, she surprised him with a question. "Daddy, do you still love Mommy?" Richard felt his heart race. He knew this question would come eventually, but it still caught him off guard. "Sophia, love. Love is complicated," he began, carefully choosing his words. "Your mother and I loved each other very much once, and in a way we'll always love each other, because that love gave us you. But sometimes, love between adults changes. That doesn't mean we love less, just that we love in a different way." Sophia frowned, processing the information. "So you're not going to live together again?" Richard smiled sadly. "Probably not, my love, but that doesn't mean we can't be a family. Families come in all shapes and sizes, remember?" Sophia nodded, seeming satisfied with the answer. "I like our family the way it is now, but I also like it when we're all together, like at the picnic." Richard kissed his daughter's forehead. "I like it too, Princess, and I promise we'll have more moments like that." As he closed Sophia's bedroom door, Richard found himself thinking about Claire. The woman he had seen in the park was very different from the one he had left months ago. There was a humility, a vulnerability that he had never seen before. The days that followed, Richard caught himself reflecting on his own journey. He too had changed a lot since that fateful night when he had taken Sophia. He had become not only a more present father, but a more compassionate man, more open to second chances. One afternoon, while working in his home office, Richard received a message from Claire. "Sophia told me about the ballet recital next week. Can I come watch?" Richard looked at the message for a long moment. A few months ago, his answer would have been an automatic no. But now, "Of course," he replied. "I'm sure Sophia will be happy to have both of us there." Sophia's smile when she learned that both parents would be at her recital was all the confirmation Richard needed that he was making the right decision. On the night of the recital, Richard and Claire sat side by side in the audience, exchanging nervous smiles as they waited for Sophia to appear. When the curtain opened and Sophia danced gracefully across the stage, Richard felt a wave of pride and love so intense it almost knocked him over. Looking at Claire, he saw tears in her eyes. The same pride and love reflected on her face. At that moment, Richard realized that despite all the hurts and mistakes of the past, they would always be connected by this unconditional love for Sophia. After the recital, as Sophia ran to them with a huge smile on her face, Richard had an epiphany. The path ahead of them wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, moments of doubt, and perhaps even setbacks. But it's worth trying, for Sophia, for themselves, for the chance to rewrite their story not as a fairy tale, but as a real, imperfect, and deeply human narrative of redemption and unconditional love. And so, with Sophia between them, hugging them with all the strength of her small arms, Richard allowed himself for the first time in a long time to have hope for the future. Her future where even if they weren't a traditional family, They would be a family united by what really matters: love, understanding, and the sincere desire to do the best for those we love. The following months brought a series of changes and challenges for Richard, Sophia, and Claire. The dynamic between them was evolving, finding a new balance that, although still fragile, promised a more harmonious future. Richard remained Sophia's primary guardian, but Claire's visits became more frequent and relaxed. The initial tension gave way to a cautious cordiality between the ex-spouses, always with Sophia's well-being as the priority. One Sunday afternoon, while Sophia was playing in the condominium playground, Richard received an unexpected call. It was Gus, Claire's ex-partner. "Richard, I need to talk to you." The voice on the other end of the line sounded hesitant, almost remorseful. Richard felt a knot in his stomach. "Gus, what do you want?" There was a pause before Gus answered. "I want to apologize for everything. For the way we treated Sophia, how we behaved. I wasn't in a good place in my life, and I let that affect an innocent child." The sincerity in Gus's voice caught Richard by surprise. He watched Sophia swinging happily, free from the worries that had tormented her months ago. "I appreciate your apologies, Gus," Richard replied after a moment of reflection. "But I'm not the one who needs to hear them, it's Sophia." "I know," Gus agreed. "That's why I'm calling. I'd like to know if it would be possible to talk to her, explain, ask for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it, but—" Richard interrupted. "Look, I'm not going to lie. The idea doesn't please me, but I'll talk to Sophia and see how she feels. If she's willing, we can arrange something, but it will be on my terms, understood?" Of course." Gus's voice sounded relieved. "Thank you, Richard, really." After hanging up, Richard watched Sophia for a long time, thoughtful. How to explain to a 7-year-old child the complex meanders of adult relationships? How to protect her without depriving her of the opportunity for understanding and forgiveness? That night after dinner, Richard sat with Sophia on the living room couch. "Princess, do you remember Gus? Mom's friend who lived with you?" Sophia nodded, her face closing slightly. "I remember. He didn't like me very much." Richard felt his heart clench. "Well, he called today. He wants to talk to you, apologize for the way he treated you." Sophia's eyes widened in surprise. "He wants to apologize? Why?" "Because he realized he did something wrong," Richard explained gently. "Sometimes adults make mistakes too, you know. And when we realize it, it's important to try to fix things." Sophia was silent for a moment, playing distractedly with the hem of her shirt. "Do I have to talk to him?" Richard hugged his daughter. "No, my love. You don't have to do anything you don't want to. The decision is yours." After a few more seconds of silence, Sophia looked at her father. "Can I think about it for a little bit?" Richard smiled, proud of his little one's maturity. "Of course you can, as long as you want." In the days that followed, Richard noticed Sophia more thoughtful than usual. She asked questions about forgiveness, about how people change, about second chances. Richard answered as best he could, always reinforcing that the most important thing was how she felt. A week later, during breakfast, Sophia surprised Richard. "Daddy, I think I want to talk to Gus." Richard almost choked on his coffee. "Are you sure, Princess?" Sophia nodded solemnly. "I am, but can you stay with me?" "Of course, my love. Always." The meeting was scheduled for the following weekend, at a family cafe near Richard's apartment. Gus arrived first, visibly nervous. When Richard entered hand in hand with Sophia, the man stood up, hesitant. "Hi, Sophia," he greeted, his voice trembling. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." Sophia looked at her father, who nodded encouragingly, before responding, "Hi, Uncle Gus." The three sat down, an uncomfortable silence hanging over the table. Finally, Gus began to speak. "Sophia, I wanted to apologize for the way I treated you, for the things I said and did. It wasn't fair to you. You're an amazing girl and you didn't deserve any of that." Sophia listened attentively, her little face serious. When Gus finished, she asked, "Why did you do those things?" Gus seemed surprised by the direct question. He looked at Richard, who remained silent, letting the other man answer. I was having problems, Sophia. Problems that had nothing to do with you. I was unhappy, and I let that unhappiness affect how I treated people around me, especially you. That was wrong, and I'm sorry. Sophia was silent for a moment, processing the words. Then, to the surprise of both adults, she extended her small hand across the table. Okay, I forgive you, Uncle Gus. Gus looked at the extended hand, tears forming in his eyes. He gently shook it. Thank you, Sophia. You're much stronger and wiser than I ever was. The rest of the meeting went surprisingly lightly. Sophia even shared some stories about her school and her ballet classes. When it was time to leave, Gus said goodbye with a genuine smile. On the way back home, Richard couldn't contain his pride. Sophia, you were amazing today. You know that, right? Sophia shrugged, a small smile on her lips. I just did what you and Mom always teach me, that it's important to forgive. Richard felt his eyes fill with tears. His daughter, at just 7 years old, was giving him a lesson in compassion and maturity. That night, as he tucked Sophia into bed, the girl asked a question that caught Richard by surprise. Daddy, do you think you'll ever forgive Mom completely? Richard sat on the edge of the bed, thoughtful. You know, Princess, forgiveness is sometimes complicated for adults, but I'm trying. Your mother and I are trying to build something new, something better. Not to get back together like before, but to be the best parents we can be for you. Sophia smiled, satisfied with the answer. I like that. Good night, Daddy. I love you. I love you too, my little wise one. As he closed the door, Richard reflected on how much their lives had changed in recent months. The journey hadn't been easy, but the results were undeniable. Sophia was happy, safe, and growing in wisdom and compassion every day. He picked up his phone and, after a moment of hesitation, sent a message to Claire. Sophia gave a lesson in forgiveness today that made me think, how about we have coffee? This week, we have a lot to talk about. The response came almost instantly. I'd love to, thank you, Richard. Sitting on his couch, looking at the illuminated city through the window, Richard felt a wave of peace envelop him. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, he faced it not with fear, but with hope. A hope born of unconditional love for his daughter, and the understanding that sometimes the greatest moments of growth come from the most difficult challenges. With a smile on his lips, Richard prepared for bed, looking forward to what the new day would bring. Because now he knew that no matter what happened, they would face it together, as a family redefined and strengthened by the trials they had overcome. Autumn gave way to winter, and with it came new challenges and discoveries for Richard, Sophia and Claire. The coffee that Richard had proposed to Claire turned into a series of meetings where the two ex-spouses began to rebuild a relationship based not on romantic love, but on mutual respect and the shared desire to provide the best for Sophia. On a cold afternoon in December, Richard and Claire met at a cozy coffee shop in downtown Los Angeles. The steam from their coffee cups rose between them, like a thin curtain separating the past from the present. How is it for you? Claire asked, breaking the silence. All this change, being a full-time dad. Richard smiled, rotating the cup between his hands. Challenging, rewarding, sometimes scary, but I wouldn't trade it for anything in this world. Claire nodded, a glimmer of sadness in her eyes. I've missed so much, Richard. Moments I'll never get back. Claire, Richard began, carefully choosing his words. The past is the past. What matters is what we do from here on out. Sophia loves you and she needs you in her life. But how? Claire's voice trembled slightly. How can I be the mother she deserves after everything? Richard took a deep breath. One day at a time, being present, listening to her, being consistent. It's not easy, believe me, I'm still learning every day. Claire smiled weakly. You were always good at this, being a father, I mean. I was the one who got lost along the way. Hey, Richard reached out, lightly touching Claire's arm. We all make mistakes. The important thing is to recognize them and work to be better. At that moment, something changed between them. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but the beginning of a mutual understanding, a recognition that they were both trying, each in their own way, to be better for Sophia. The following weeks brought a new dynamic. Claire began to participate more actively in Sophia's school life, attending parent meetings and helping with projects. Richard, in turn, learned to make room for mother and daughter to rebuild their bond. One Saturday, while Richard was working, on some reports at home, Sophia came running in, excited. "Daddy, Daddy, look what Mum and I made." She held out a homemade photo album, its pages decorated with glitter and colorful stickers. Richard flipped through the album, seeing photos of Sophia from baby to present, many of which he didn't even have himself. "It's beautiful, Princess," he said, genuinely impressed. "You two did an amazing job." Sophia smiled, proud. "Mum said she wanted to show me how I've always been loved, even when things were difficult." Richard felt a lump in his throat. It was a significant gesture from Claire, a way of acknowledging the past while building bridges to the future. That night, after putting Sophia to bed, Richard called Claire. "Hi," he said when she answered. "I just wanted to say thank you for the album. It meant a lot to Sophia, and to me too." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line before Claire responded. Her voice choked up. "Thank you for giving me the chance to do this, to be in her life again." The conversation that followed was long and emotionally charged. For the first time since the divorce, Richard and Claire really talked about their mistakes, their hurts, their fears, about the love they both felt for Sophia and the desire to do the best for her. When they finally hung up hours later, something had changed. It wasn't a new beginning, but perhaps the closing of a painful chapter and the start of something new and unexplored. The following months brought a series of firsts. The first time Richard, Claire and Sophia went out together for a day in the park without tension or discomfort. The first time Claire spent an entire weekend with Sophia, with Richard feeling secure enough not to constantly worry. The first time the three of them managed to sit together at Sophia's ballet recital, applauding proudly as their little ballerina twirled on stage. However, it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were moments of relapse, arguments about parenting decisions, insecurities resurfacing, but with each obstacle they learned to communicate better, to prioritize Sophia's well-being above their own differences. One night, as Richard was helping Sophia with her homework, the girl made an observation that caught him by surprise. "Daddy, I think Mom is happier now, and you are too." Richard looked at his daughter, amazed at her perception. "Is that so? And how do you feel about that?" Sophia smiled, her eyes shining. "I like it. It's like we have two happy homes now instead of one sad one." Sophia's words stayed with Richard for days. He realized that amid all the challenges and changes, they had really managed to create something positive from a difficult situation. On a Sunday afternoon, while having ice cream in the park, a tradition they had recently established, Richard observed Claire and Sophia laughing together, making funny faces at each other. The sound of their laughter, mixed with the park's buzz and the birds singing, created a symphony of happiness that warmed his heart. At that moment, Richard had an epiphany. Love hadn't disappeared from his life after the divorce. It had merely transformed, evolved into something different, but equally powerful. The love for Sophia, the renewed affection for Claire as a co-parent and friend, the self-love he had developed in becoming a better father, all of this formed a new kind of family, not defined by traditional bonds, but by mutual affection, respect and commitment. As they walked back home, Sophia between them holding both their hands, Richard exchanged a look with Claire. No, words were necessary. In that look was understanding, gratitude, and a silent promise to continue working together for their daughter's sake. The journey wasn't over. There would be more challenges ahead, more moments of doubt and difficulty. But now Richard knew they had the tools and the strength to face them. Together as a redefined family, they were writing a new chapter in their lives, a chapter of hope, growth, and unconditional love. The school year was coming to an end, And with it came news that shook the already established routine of Richard, Sophia, and Claire. Sophia's school was organizing a week-long trip to an educational camp, something that left the girl extremely excited and her parents with mixed feelings. "A whole week?" asked Richard, looking at the authorization form that Sophia had handed, him with eyes bright with expectation. "Yes, Daddy. We're going to learn about nature, go on hikes, observe stars. Please, can I go?" begged Sophia, jumping with excitement. Richard exchanged a look with Claire, who was visiting that afternoon. It was the first time they would face such a long separation from Sophia since the new family dynamic had been established. "Well, we need to talk about this, Sophia," said Claire, her voice betraying a bit of apprehension. "It's an important decision." Sophia looked from one to the other, her excitement diminishing a little. "You don't want me to go?" Richard knelt down to be at eye level with his daughter. "It's not that, Princess, it's just that it's the first time you'd be away from home for so long. We need to make sure everything is okay, you understand?" The girl nodded, but her disappointment was evident. "Okay, but you'll think about it, right?" "Of course we will, my love," Claire assured, hugging her daughter. "Now how about you go play for a bit while Daddy and I talk?" As soon as Sophia left the room, Richard and Claire looked at each other, both with worried expressions. "What? How do you think?" asked Richard, running his hand through his hair in a nervous gesture. Claire sighed. "Part of me wants to say no. It's too long away. So many things could happen. But another part knows it would be an incredible experience for her." Richard nodded, understanding the dilemma perfectly. "I know. I'm afraid she'll get homesick, that she'll get hurt, that she'll realize she can be fine without us." "Around," completed Claire, a sad smile on her lips. Richard chuckled softly. "Yeah, that too, but maybe it would be good for her, and for us." They spent the next hour discussing the pros and cons, reading and rereading the information provided by the school. In the end, they reached a joint decision. They called Sophia back to the room, the girl clearly anxious for the answer. "Sophia," Richard began, maintaining a serious tone, "your mother and I talked a lot about this trip." Sophia's face fell, anticipating a negative, but then Claire smiled and said, "And we decided that you can go." Sophia's eyes widened in surprise and joy. "Really? I can really go?" "You can," confirmed Richard, "but we have some conditions." They explained that Sophia should call every day, even if just for a few minutes, and that she should follow all the rules established by the teachers and monitors. The girl readily agreed, barely able to contain her excitement. The weeks leading up to the trip were a whirlwind of preparations. Richard and Claire worked together to ensure that Sophia had everything she needed, from appropriate clothes to a small first aid kit. On the night before departure, while helping Sophia pack, Richard felt a lump in his throat. His little girl was growing up, ready for her first big adventure away from home. "Daddy," called Sophia, noticing her father's thoughtful expression. "Are you sad?" Richard smiled, pulling her into a hug. "No, Princess. Just thinking about how much you've grown. It seems like yesterday that you fit in my arm." Sophia laughed. "But I still fit in your hug, right?" "Always," assured Richard, hugging her tighter. On the morning of departure, Richard, Claire, and Sophia arrived together at the school. The yard was full of anxious parents and excited children. As Sophia joined her classmates, Richard and Claire stayed behind, watching. "She'll be okay, won't she?" asked Claire, her voice trembling slightly. Richard put his arm around her shoulders, in a gesture of comfort. "She will. Our daughter is strong and smart. She's going to have a lot of fun." When it was time to say goodbye, Sophia ran back to them. She hugged Claire first, then Richard, and then both together. "I love you," she said, her voice muffled between the two. "We love you too, my love," Claire replied, tears in her eyes. "Very, very much." "Have fun, Princess," added Richard. "And remember, we're always here for you." As the bus departed, Richard and Claire stood side by side, waving until the vehicle disappeared around the corner. A strange silence fell over them. "And now?" asked Claire, looking a bit lost. Richard shrugged, feeling equally disoriented. "How about a coffee? I think we both need it." The days that followed were an emotional roller coaster. Sophia's daily calls were the highlight, with the girl chattering animatedly about her adventures, new friendships, the incredible things she was learning. To the surprise of both, Richard and Claire found themselves spending more time together during that week. Dinners to discuss Sophia's news turned into long conversations about the past, present, and future. "You know," said Claire on one of those nights as they walked through the park after dinner, "I never imagined we'd reach this point." Richard looked at her curious. "What point?" "This," she gestured between them. "Being real friends. Parents who really work together for our daughter's good." Richard smiled, thoughtful. "I didn't either, but I'm happy we got here." On the eve of Sophia's return, they decided to prepare a small welcome-back party. As they decorated Richard's apartment with balloons and banners, an atmosphere of camaraderie and affection hung in the air. "Richard," called Claire, her voice suddenly serious, "I wanted to thank you." "For what?" he asked, coming down from the ladder where he was hanging a banner. "For not giving up. On Sophia, on me as her mother. For giving me a second chance when I least deserved it." Richard was silent for a moment, absorbing the words. "Claire, we all deserve second chances. You proved you were willing to change, to be better. And look where we've come." Impulsively, Claire hugged him. It was a brief hug, but loaded with meaning, gratitude, forgiveness, a new beginning. When Sophia finally arrived, her face lit up at seeing not only the decoration, but her parents together, smiling and in harmony. She ran to them, enveloping them in a tight hug. "I missed you so much," she exclaimed, "but it was amazing. I have so much to tell." And so, sitting in the living room, with Sophia in the center animatedly narrating her adventures, Richard and Claire exchanged a look of mutual understanding. They had faced a week of growth, not only for Sophia, but for themselves as well. The journey was far from over. There would be more challenges, more moments of growth and learning. But now, more than ever, they knew they could face anything. As a family, redefined and strengthened by love, understanding, and the shared desire to do the best for Sophia. And as the night progressed, filled with laughter, stories, and the warmth of family love, Richard felt a deep sense of gratitude. For Sophia, for Claire, and for the incredible journey that had brought them here. The future, once uncertain and scary, now shone with possibilities, a new chapter waiting to be written, full of love, growth, and the endless adventures that life still held in store for them. Time flew by, and before they knew it, Sophia was about to turn 9 years old. The girl had grown not only in stature, but in maturity and understanding of the world around her. Richard and Claire, in turn, continued to evolve in their new co-parenting dynamic, facing challenges and celebrating victories together. One Saturday afternoon, while Sophia played in the park with some school friends, Richard and Claire sat on a nearby bench watching their daughter with pride. "She's so big," commented Claire, a touch of nostalgia in her voice. "It seems like yesterday she could barely climb that slide by herself." Richard nodded, smiling. "And now she's there, leading the other kids in some complex game that only they understand." Claire laughed, but then her expression turned serious. "Richard, there's something I need to tell you." The tone in her voice made Richard turn to face her, concerned. "What is it? Did something happen?" Claire took a deep breath before continuing. "I received a job offer. It's a great opportunity, but it's in San Francisco." Richard felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. "San Francisco? But what about Sophia?" I know, Claire hurried to say. "That's why I'm telling you. I wouldn't make any decision without talking to you first. Sophia is our priority." Richard was silent for a moment, processing the information. The idea of Claire moving to another city, taking Sophia with her, was something he hadn't considered. They had worked so hard to get where they were, to build this new family dynamic. "What do you want to do?" he finally asked. Claire sighed. "Honestly, I don't know. It's an incredible opportunity professionally, but the idea of being away from Sophia, of undoing everything we've built, I don't know if I can." Richard watched Sophia playing, her laughter echoing through the park. We need to think about what's best for her. I know, Claire agreed. That's why I wanted to talk to you first. Maybe we can find a solution together. In the days that followed, Richard and Claire had several long and difficult conversations. They explored all possible options. Claire refusing the job, Sophia spending half the year in each city, Richard considering a transfer to his company in San Francisco. Each scenario brought its own challenges and complications. One night, while discussing the matter once again after Sophia had gone to sleep, Richard had an idea. What if, he began hesitantly, what if you accepted the job but stayed here? Claire looked at him confused. What do you mean? Well, didn't the company offer the option of remote work? You could work from Los Angeles most of the time, traveling to San Francisco only when necessary. Claire's eyes lit up with the possibility. That could work, but where would I stay? Renting an apartment would be expensive, considering I'd have to maintain 2 residences. Richard hesitated for a moment before making the suggestion that would change everything. You could stay here. My apartment has an office I hardly use. We could turn it into a room for you. Claire stared at him, shocked. Are you suggesting I move in here, Richard? That's crazy, I know, he completed with a small smile. But think about it. Sophia would have both of us around all the time. You would save on rent and could focus on your career, and we've already proven we can work well together as parents. The silence that followed was long and loaded. Finally, Claire spoke. And if it doesn't work out? If we start fighting again? Richard took her hand, a gesture that surprised them both. Then we'll deal with it when and if it happens. But Claire, look at how much we've already overcome. I think we deserve to try, don't we? For Sophia. Tears formed in Claire's eyes. For Sophia, she softly agreed. The decision for Claire to move into Richard's apartment wasn't taken lightly. They spent weeks discussing rules, boundaries, and expectations. They consulted a family therapist to help them navigate this new dynamic. And, most importantly, they talked openly with Sophia about the change. Sophia's initial reaction was pure joy. You mean I'll have both of you here all the time? She asked, her eyes shining with excitement. Richard and Claire exchanged a look before Richard answered. Yes, Princess. But it's important that you understand that this doesn't mean Mommy and Daddy are getting back together like before. We'll be a family, but in a different way. Sophia nodded, surprising them with her maturity. I know, Daddy. You're better as friends, and I like it that way. The move happened gradually. Richard's office was transformed into a cozy room for Claire. New routines were established, with each respecting the other's space and privacy. There were challenges, of course, moments of tension when old habits resurfaced, discussions about house rules, adjustments in family dynamics. But for every difficult moment, there were dozens of moments of joy and unity. Family breakfast became a daily tradition. Game nights on Fridays were sacred, and Sophia flourished, having the constant presence and love of both parents. A few months after the move, on a quiet night, Richard found Claire on the balcony, thoughtfully looking at the illuminated city. Everything okay? He asked, joining her. Claire smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her face. You know, I never thought I'd say this, but I'm happy, truly happy. Richard nodded, understanding perfectly. Me too. It's strange, isn't it? How things worked out in a way we could never have predicted. Thank you, Claire said softly, for this second chance, for believing we could make this work. Richard looked at her, seeing no longer the ex-wife who once hurt him, but a partner, a friend, a dedicated co-parent. Thank you for not giving up, for fighting to be the mother Sophia deserves. At that moment, they heard Sophia's sleepy voice calling from the living room. Daddy? Mommy? They exchanged a knowing smile before responding in unison. We're coming, love. As they walked back inside, side by side, Richard reflected on the incredible journey they had traveled, from a divorced and bitter couple to an unconventional family but full of love and understanding. The future still held challenges, of that he was certain, but now, more than ever, Richard knew they could face anything together. not as a romantic couple, but as partners in the most important adventure of their lives, raising Sophia with all the love and support she deserved. Sophia's 10th birthday was approaching, marking not only a decade of the girl's life, but also almost 3 years since the fateful night that changed the course of their lives. Richard, Claire, and Sophia had found a unique balance in their new family dynamic, but as always, life was ready to throw new challenges their way. One Sunday morning, while Sophia was still asleep, Richard and Claire were having coffee in the kitchen, discussing plans for the birthday party. "She insists on a forest adventure theme," said Claire, laughing softly. "I think that school camp is still vivid in her memory." Richard smiled, remembering Sophia's excitement after the trip. "Well, we can turn the terrace into a mini forest, with some plants, lights, and—" He was interrupted by the sound of his cell phone. Frowning at seeing the name on the screen, Richard answered, "Hello, Mark." Richard's expression quickly changed from curiosity to concern as he listened to the lawyer. Claire watched him attentively, sensing that something important was happening. When Richard finally hung up, his face was pale. "What happened?" asked Claire, apprehensive. Richard took a deep breath before answering. "It's about the company. We're facing a lawsuit from a former business partner. He claims we stole his intellectual property." Claire gasped. "But is that true?" "Of course not," exclaimed Richard, running his hand through his hair in frustration. "But he has documents that, out of context, may look incriminating. Mark says we'll need a solid defense." The days that followed were a whirlwind. Richard spent hours in meetings with lawyers, reviewing documents and preparing his defense. Claire, realizing the gravity of the situation, took on more responsibilities at home, trying to keep Sophia's routine as normal as possible. One night, while Richard was working late in his makeshift office in the living room, Sophia appeared, still in her pajamas. "Daddy," she called softly, "are you going to read to me today?" Richard looked at his daughter, feeling a pang of guilt. He had missed the last 3 reading nights, something that was sacred to them. "I'm sorry, Princess," he said, rubbing his tired eyes. "Daddy's very busy with work right now." Sophia's face fell, but she nodded understandingly. "Okay. Good night." "Daddy!" As she turned to leave, Richard felt as if something inside him broke. "Wait!" he called. Sophia stopped, looking at him hopefully. "Come here. Let's read a chapter." The smile that lit up Sophia's face was worth every second of sleep he would lose later. As he read, with Sophia snuggled up beside him, Richard realized he was running the risk of making the same mistake as in the past, letting work consume all his time and energy, neglecting what really mattered. The next morning during breakfast, Richard made an announcement. "Sophia, Mom, I need to apologize. I've been distant these days, and that's not fair to you." Claire looked at him sympathetically. "Richard, we understand you're going through a difficult time at work." "Yes," he agreed, "but that's no excuse for neglecting my family. From now on, I'm going to set clear boundaries. Work stays at the office, and when I'm home, I'm 100% present for you." Sophia smiled, hugging her father. "I love you, Daddy." "I love you too, Princess," Richard replied, feeling lighter than he had in days. The weeks leading up to the trial were intense, but Richard kept his promise. He reorganized his schedule, delegated more responsibilities at the company, and made sure he was always present for important moments with Sophia. Claire, in turn, proved to be an invaluable ally. She not only took care of most of the preparations for Sophia's birthday, but also offered emotional support to Richard in moments of doubt and stress. On the eve of the trial, after putting Sophia to bed, Richard and Claire sat on the balcony sharing a bottle of wine. "How are you feeling?" asked Claire, her voice soft and concerned. Richard sighed, looking at the illuminated city. "Honestly, terrified. If we lose this lawsuit, it could be the end of the company." Claire placed a comforting hand on his arm. "Hey, look at me," she said, waiting until Richard faced her. "You're going to get through this. You're strong, smart, and you have the truth on your side. And more importantly, you have the two of us supporting you." Richard felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. "Thank you, Claire. I don't know what I'd do without you two." "We're a family," she replied simply, "in good times and bad." The day of the trial arrived, and to Richard's surprise, both Claire and Sophia insisted on accompanying him to the courthouse. "But what about school?" he asked, looking at Sophia. The girl shrugged. "One day won't hurt, and you're more important, Daddy." With tears in his eyes, Richard hugged his family before entering the courtroom. The hours that followed were tense. Arguments were presented, witnesses heard. Richard watched with his heart in his throat as his lawyer meticulously dismantled the other party's allegations. When the judge finally announced his decision, absolving Richard and his company of all charges, the feeling of relief was overwhelming. Leaving the courthouse, Richard was greeted by enthusiastic hugs from Sophia and Claire. "I knew you could do it, Daddy," exclaimed Sophia, jumping with joy. Claire smiled, her eyes shining with pride. "Congratulations, Richard. You deserved this victory." That night, they celebrated at home with pizza and a movie. Sophia nestled between her parents on the couch. As he watched his daughter laugh at a funny scene, Richard reflected on how his definition of success had changed in recent years. Yes, the victory in court was important. But the real triumph was right there, in that simple moment of family happiness, in having Claire as a partner and friend, in seeing Sophia's radiant smile, in knowing that no matter what life threw in their path, they would face it together. When Sophia finally fell asleep, exhausted by the day's excitement, Richard gently carried her to bed. Returning to the living room, he found Claire tidying up the remains of the impromptu party. "Thank you," he said softly. Claire looked at him, confused. "For what?" "For everything," Richard replied. "For being here, for being an amazing mother to Sophia, for being my friend, even after everything we've been through." Claire smiled, a smile full of affection and understanding. "We're a team now, Richard. A family. Different maybe, but still a family." That night, lying in his bed, Richard reflected on the incredible journey they had traveled. From a failed marriage to a successful partnership. From hurts and resentments to understanding and mutual support. The future was still uncertain, of course. There would be more challenges, more moments of doubt. But now, more than ever, Richard knew they could face anything. Together as the unique and special family they had become. Time passed quickly, and before they knew it, Sophia was about to turn 13 years old. The sweet and innocent girl was rapidly transforming into a curious and sometimes challenging teenager. Richard and Claire found themselves navigating uncharted waters, trying to balance Sophia's need for independence with their own parental concern. One Saturday afternoon, while Richard was working on some reports in the living room, Sophia appeared, looking nervous. "Dad, can I talk to you?" she asked, fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. Richard immediately closed his laptop, giving his daughter his full attention. "Of course, Princess. What is it?" Sophia took a deep breath before blurting out, "There's a boy in my class and Lucas, he invited me to go to the movies." Richard felt as if he'd been punched in the stomach. His little Sophia interested in boys. When did this happen? "Oh," was all he managed to say initially. After a moment, he managed to compose himself. "And do you want to go?" Sophia nodded, her cheeks blushing slightly. "Yes, but I don't know if you and Mom will let me." At that moment, Claire entered the room, immediately sensing the tense atmosphere. "What's going on here?" Sophia repeated the situation to her mother, who exchanged a significant look with Richard. "Well," Claire began, sitting down next to her daughter, "I think we need to talk about this, the three of us together." The conversation that followed was a mixture of awkward moments, nervous laughter, and serious discussions about trust, responsibility, and boundaries. In the end, it was decided that Sophia could go to the movies, but with some conditions. They would drop her off and pick her up, and she should keep in regular contact via text messages. When Sophia left the room, radiant with the permission, Richard and Claire looked at each other, a mixture of pride and melancholy on their faces. "Our little girl is growing up," Claire said softly. Richard nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. Too fast for my liking. In the weeks that followed, Richard and Claire found themselves facing a series of new challenges. Sophia began to question rules she had previously accepted without discussion, to demand more privacy, to spend more time with friends. One night, after a particularly heated argument about Sophia's bedtime, Richard and Claire sat on the balcony, both exhausted. "This is harder than I imagined," Richard admitted, rubbing his face. Claire smiled weakly. Who would have thought that dealing with a preteen would be more challenging than restructuring an entire company, huh? Richard laughed, grateful for the touch of humor. "Yeah, sometimes I wonder if we're doing the right thing, if we're not being too strict or too permissive." "I think all parents wonder that," Claire replied thoughtfully. "But you know what? I think we're doing well. Sophia is an amazing girl, intelligent, compassionate. We're doing something right." Richard nodded, feeling a renewed sense of confidence. They were in this together, facing the challenges of raising a teenager as a united front. It wasn't always easy, but the love they both had for Sophia and the mutual respect they had developed made all the difference. As they continued to chat, discussing strategies for the upcoming teen years and sharing their fears and hopes, Richard realized how far they had come. From bitter exes to co-parents and friends, they had created a unique family dynamic that, while unconventional, was filled with love and understanding. The future would undoubtedly bring more challenges, but Richard felt ready to face them. With Claire by his side and Sophia's happiness as their shared goal, he knew they could handle whatever came their way. This was their family, redefined, resilient, and stronger than ever. As the months passed, Richard, Claire, and Sophia continued to navigate the complexities of their unique family situation. Sophia's transition into her teenage years brought new challenges and joys, testing the strength of the bonds they had worked so hard to build. One evening, as Richard was preparing dinner, Sophia approached him with a serious expression on her face. "Dad, can we talk about something?" she asked, her voice tinged with nervousness. Richard turned down the heat on the stove and gave his daughter his full attention. "Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind?" Sophia took a deep breath before speaking. "I was wondering, would it be okay if I started calling Claire Mom again?" Richard felt a mixture of emotions wash over him, surprise, joy, and a touch of apprehension. For the past few years, Sophia had primarily referred to Claire by her first name, a habit that had developed during the tumultuous period of their separation. "Sophia, that's something very personal," Richard began carefully. "How do you feel about it?" "I've been thinking about it a lot," Sophia replied, her eyes meeting her father's. "Claire has changed so much and she's been trying really hard. I feel like she's earned it, you know?" Richard nodded, understanding the weight of his daughter's words. "Have you talked to Claire about this?" Sophia shook her head. "Not yet. I wanted to talk to you first. Is it okay with you?" Richard pulled Sophia into a hug, feeling a surge of pride for his thoughtful, mature daughter. "Of course. It's okay, sweetheart. Claire is your mother, and if you feel ready to call her that again, I think it's wonderful." Later that evening, after Sophia had gone to bed, Richard shared the conversation with Claire. Tears welled up in her eyes as she listened. "She really said that?" Claire asked, her voice choked with emotion. Richard nodded, reaching out to squeeze Claire's hand. "She did. You've worked so hard, Claire. You've become the mother Sophia deserves." Claire wiped her eyes, a mixture of joy and determination on her face. "I'll never take that for granted again, Richard. Never." The next day, Sophia approached Claire after school. Richard watched from the kitchen as his daughter nervously fidgeted with her backpack strap before speaking. "Claire, I was wondering if it would be okay if I started calling you Mom again." The look of pure joy on Claire's face was something Richard would never forget. She pulled Sophia into a tight embrace, both of them crying and laughing at the same time. "I would love that more than anything in the world, sweetheart," Claire said, her voice thick with emotion. As Richard watched this touching scene unfold, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. Their journey had been long and often difficult, but moments like these made it all worthwhile. They had created something beautiful from the ashes of their past, a family bound not by traditional roles, but by love, forgiveness, and mutual respect. The coming years would undoubtedly bring new challenges. Sophia would continue to grow and change, testing boundaries and asserting her independence. Richard and Claire would need to adapt, learning to parent a teenager while maintaining their own unique relationship. But as Richard looked at Claire and Sophia, still locked in their emotional embrace, he knew that they were ready for whatever lay ahead. They had weathered storms before and come out stronger. This unconventional family of theirs might not fit any traditional mold, but it was filled with more love and understanding than he could have ever imagined. With a smile, Richard joined Claire and Sophia, wrapping his arms around them both. In that moment, he knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together, as a family. As Sophia's teenage years progressed, the dynamics in their unconventional family continued to evolve. Richard, Claire, and Sophia faced new challenges and milestones together, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. One crisp autumn morning, as Richard was reviewing some work documents at the kitchen table, Sophia burst into the room, her face alight with excitement. "Dad, Mom, guess what?" she exclaimed, waving a piece of paper in her hand. Claire, who had been preparing breakfast, turned from the stove with a curious smile. "What is it, sweetheart?" "I got selected for the school's exchange program to France," Sophia announced, her eyes shining with anticipation. "It's for 3 months next semester. Can I go, please?" Richard and Claire exchanged a look, a mixture of pride and apprehension crossing their faces. This was a big step. Their daughter potentially living in another country for 3 months. "That's wonderful news, Sophia," Richard said, trying to keep his voice steady. "But it's a big decision. We'll need to discuss this as a family." "Your father's right," Claire added, moving to stand beside Richard. "This is a huge opportunity, but there's a lot to consider." Sophia's excitement dimmed slightly, but she nodded in understanding. "I know it's a big deal, but I really want to do this. Can we talk about it tonight, please?" "Of course," Richard agreed. "We'll sit down after dinner and go through everything together." That evening, after they had finished their meal, the family gathered in the living room. Richard and Claire listened intently as Sophia presented her case for going on the exchange program. She had clearly done her research, outlining the educational benefits, the cultural experiences she would gain, and how it would look on her college applications. As Sophia spoke, Richard couldn't help but marvel at how mature and articulate his daughter had become. It seemed like only yesterday she was the little girl he had rescued from that kitchen floor, and now here she was, ready to embark on an international adventure. When Sophia finished her presentation, Claire spoke up. "You've clearly put a lot of thought into this, sweetheart, but there are practical matters we need to discuss. The cost, for one thing. And safety," Richard added. "We'd need to know all the details about where you'd be staying, who would be responsible for you." Sophia nodded eagerly. "I have all that information. The school provided a whole packet about the host families, the support system in place, everything." The discussion continued late into the night. Richard and Claire asked questions, voiced concerns, and listened to Sophia's responses. It was a mature, open dialogue that highlighted just how far they had come as a family. Finally, as the clock neared midnight, Richard and Claire exchanged a long look. They didn't need words to communicate. Years of co-parenting had given them an almost telepathic understanding when it came to Sophia. "All right, Sophia," Richard said, turning back to their daughter. "Your mother and I have decided that you can go on the exchange program." Sophia's face lit up with joy, but before she could speak, Claire held up a hand. "However, there are conditions. We'll need regular check-ins, detailed itineraries when you travel, and you must keep up with your studies." "Of course," Sophia agreed enthusiastically. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." She threw her arms around both her parents, pulling them into a group hug. As Richard held his daughter close, he felt a complex mix of emotions. Pride in the young woman Sophia was becoming, excitement for the adventures that lay ahead of her, and yes, a touch of sadness at the realization that his little girl was growing up so fast. Later that night, after Sophia had gone to bed, still buzzing with excitement, Richard and Claire sat on the balcony sharing a bottle of wine. "Are we doing the right thing?" Claire asked, her voice soft with concern. "Letting her go so far away?" Richard took a sip of his wine before responding. "I think we are. It's scary, but Sophia's ready for this, and we've given her the tools she needs to navigate the world." Claire nodded, leaning her head on Richard's shoulder. It was a gesture of comfort they had grown accustomed to over the years, their friendship deepening alongside their co-parenting relationship. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Claire mused. "From where we started to this moment, making decisions about our daughter's international adventures." Richard chuckled softly. "We certainly have. I never could have imagined this scenario when I first brought Sophia home that night." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. The city lights twinkled below them, a reminder of the vast world Sophia was about to explore. "You know," Richard said finally, "I'm proud of us, of how we've managed to put Sophia first, to create this unconventional but loving family." Claire lifted her head to meet Richard's gaze, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Me too, thank you, Richard, for giving me the chance to be a better mother, for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." Richard squeezed Claire's hand gently. "We did this together, Claire, and we'll continue to do so, no matter what challenges come our way." They clinked their glasses in a quiet toast to their family and Sophia's upcoming adventure. Richard felt a sense of peace wash over him. The road hadn't always been easy, but every bump, every twist and turn had led them here, to this moment of unity and mutual respect. The future was uncertain, with Sophia's impending trip to France just the first of many changes to come. But Richard knew that whatever lay ahead, they would face it as they had faced everything else, together as a family bound by love, understanding, and an unwavering commitment to each other's happiness. As the weeks passed, preparations for Sophia's exchange program to France intensified. The family's apartment became a hub of activity, with French language books scattered across tables, travel guides piled high, and lists of things to pack pinned to the refrigerator. One evening, as Richard was helping Sophia practice her French pronunciation, Claire entered the living room with a serious expression on her face. "Sophia, honey, can you give your father and me a moment?" she asked. "We need to discuss something important." Sophia nodded, curiosity evident in her eyes as she gathered her study materials and retreated to her room. Once she was out of earshot, Claire turned to Richard. "I just got off the phone with my boss," she began, her voice a mix of excitement and apprehension. "They're offering me a promotion." Richard's face lit up. "Claire, that's fantastic. Congratulations." But Claire's expression remained somber. "There's a catch, Richard. The position is in New York." The words hung heavy in the air between them. Richard felt as if the ground had suddenly shifted beneath his feet. They had worked so hard to create this delicate balance, this unconventional family unit. The thought of it all potentially unraveling sent a wave of anxiety through him. "New York," he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. That's a big move." Claire nodded, sinking onto the couch beside him. "I know, and believe me, I'm torn. This is an incredible opportunity career-wise, but the timing, with Sophia about to leave for France and everything we've built here." Richard took a deep breath, trying to process the information. "Have you made a decision yet?" "No," Claire replied, shaking her head. "I wanted to talk to you first. We're in this together, Richard. Whatever decision we make, it has to be what's best for Sophia and for our family." Richard felt a surge of gratitude for how far they had come. There was a time when news like this would have led to arguments and accusations. Now they faced it as partners, putting their daughter's well-being first. "Okay," Richard said, his mind already racing with possibilities. "Let's think this through. What are our options?" They spent the next few hours discussing various scenarios. Claire could take the job and move to New York alone, visiting Los Angeles frequently. Richard could look for opportunities to relocate his business to the East Coast. They could try a long-distance co-parenting arrangement, with Sophia splitting her time between cities. As they talked, it became clear that there was no easy solution. Each option came with its own set of challenges and potential drawbacks. "We should talk to Sophia," Claire said finally. "She's old enough to have a say in this, especially since it will affect her life so significantly." Richard agreed, and they called Sophia back into the living room. As they explained the situation to her, Richard watched his daughter's face carefully, seeing a range of emotions flicker across it: surprise, confusion, and a hint of fear. "So, what does this mean?" Sophia asked when they had finished. "Are we moving to New York, or are you leaving, Mom?" Claire reached out to take Sophia's hand. "We don't know yet, sweetheart. That's why we wanted to talk to you. Your opinion matters in this decision." Sophia was quiet for a long moment, her brow furrowed in thought. When she finally spoke, her words surprised both Richard and Claire. I think Mom should take the job," she said slowly. "It's a great opportunity, right? And maybe I could do my exchange program in New York instead of France." Richard and Claire exchanged a look of surprise. They hadn't even considered that possibility. "Are you sure, honey?" Richard asked. "You were so excited about going to France." Sophia shrugged, a small smile playing on her lips. "France will always be there, Dad. But this way, we could all be together in a new city. It would be like a family adventure." As a see, Sophia's words sank in. Richard felt a swell of pride and love for his daughter. Once again, she had shown wisdom beyond her years, offering a solution that put the family's unity first. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Claire accepted the job offer, and Richard began the process of relocating his business. They reached out to Sophia's school about transferring her exchange program, and to their relief, the school was supportive of the idea. As they packed up their Los Angeles apartment, sorting through years of memories, Richard found himself reflecting on the incredible journey they had been on. From the pain of divorce to the joy of rediscovering friendship, from the challenges of co-parenting to the triumph of creating a loving, unconventional family unit. The night before their flight to New York, the three of them sat on the balcony of their apartment one last time, looking out at the city lights of Los Angeles. "Are we crazy for doing this?" Claire asked, a hint of nervousness in her voice. Richard chuckled, putting an arm around Sophia, who sat between them. "Maybe a little, but we're doing it together, and that's what matters." Sophia leaned her head on Richard's shoulder, a contented smile on her face. "I think we're brave," she said. "We're starting a new adventure as a family." As Richard looked at Claire over Sophia's head, he saw his own emotions reflected in her eyes: excitement, nervousness, and above all, love. Love for their daughter, love for the family they had built, and love for the journey that lay ahead. The future was uncertain, full of new challenges and experiences, but Richard knew that whatever came their way, they would face it together. They had overcome so much already, transforming pain into understanding, resentment into friendship, and broken dreams into a beautiful, unconventional reality. As the first light of dawn began to paint the sky, Richard, Claire, and Sophia shared a group hug, their hearts full of hope and anticipation for the next chapter of their lives. They were more than just co-parents or friends. They were a family bound by love, respect, and the shared adventure of life. And as they stepped onto the plane the next morning, ready to embrace their new life in New York, Richard knew that they were embarking on more than just a physical journey. They were continuing the emotional journey they had started years ago, a journey of growth, forgiveness, and unconditional love. The story of their family was far from over. In fact, in many ways, it felt like it was just beginning.